Hey everybody, we are back again. Might be again for those of you who've joined us. This is our third funding notice question and answer session. Some of you may be joining us for the first time. Either way, welcome. We have folks that are hopping into the room, which is wonderful. I know we just sent out a reminder, so. Oh, this is exciting. 20 people have joined since the reminder hit the mailboxes, which is great. So just so you know that both the chat and the Q&A are set so that the hosts and panelists can see your questions. It's not set for chatting between yourselves, just because we want to kind of keep this pretty streamlined and straightforward. Jason is going to go ahead and start and walk through the FAQs that we have sent to be posted on our FSS funding page. And Eileen, maybe if you wouldn't mind, if you could post the link to that funding page, that would be awesome. So these FAQs will hopefully be made available later today or tomorrow, depending on the timeline of those folks who do our web stuff. So Jason's going to walk through those, and then after that, we'll take other questions from you all that haven't been answered in the FAQs. If you want to, you can put those questions in the Q&A now. We'll skip over them if they're answered in the FAQ. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining. I am very excited that we are able to, as Anisi said, post this FAQ on the basis of the last couple calls that we had. And we'll continue as we get new questions in through the mailbox from this session, from the next 2-week sessions. We'll continue to update that, but we are, about halfway through the month of October, and we have a November 1st deadline. So for anyone like me who was up late doing their taxes last night from their tax extensions, you are now free to focus on the notice for FSS. It is much simpler, I assure you, if you haven't looked at it already. And I thought we could take some time today to go through the FAQs. But before I do that, let me just quickly look at some of the Q&As that have come through the Q&A. So there's a question about ad hoc reports. Where in the Grant Solutions application should you upload that? The ad hoc reports are not in Grant Solutions. There's very limited audiences that ad hoc reports apply to. You should have received a link to the report if you are one of those audiences. If you think you should have received it and you haven't, email us and we'll look into it. And if that's correct, we'll send it to you. It is really for multifamily grants who wish to certify that they have, enough participants to get more than just one renewal position. Also for MTW expansion agencies, and for anyone who would be losing a position or program. So if you're not in one of those 3 buckets, it doesn't really apply to you. But if you're in one of those buckets and you haven't received a link to it, it's not in Grant Solutions, you have to reach out to us and we'll get you that link. There's a question about the funding table and basically optimization formula, annual cost adjustment, maximum funding, all of that. Well, one thing to keep in mind is we're not doing the optimization formula this year. We built that into the notice, so we plan to do it next year and in future years. This is really to give you notice at this point that that is what we intend to do, but we're not actually implementing it this year. So you don't have to worry about that. The 4% is already built into your renewal amount that's on the table. Now, that amount really for almost everybody shouldn't be the amount that you request. That's the amount simply that we added 4% to your last award. So what you should do is ask for what it is that you actually need. That number is what we'll use to determine if your request is reasonable. We'll take a look at that number, compare it to what you request. If it's within 10% above of what your renewal number is, we'll assume it's reasonable. If it's within 10% of your BLS plus 40%, we'll assume it's reasonable. And if it's not within either of those ranges, then we'll go back to you and ask for an explanation about how you got to that number. So that's where we might ask you to submit a justification. That said, really don't worry about what the table says. Ask for as much money as you need for the positions that you qualify for. The number does reflect sort of all of the renewal and expansion positions that you are eligible for. So if you do not intend to apply for all of the expansion positions for which you are eligible, then we would expect that you would actually reduce your request so that it covers the amount of positions that you are requesting. And again, requesting expansion positions is one of the 3 scenarios where you would need to fill out the HUD 52651. The other scenarios are if you are a multifamily grantee or if you are a joint applicant.
Oh, hold on, Jason. We're getting a couple of questions about what the people can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me, or is
I
this
can hear you just fine. So,
okay?
um,
I can try and talk a little bit louder. Is that helping at all? Or
think okay, no, lots of other people are saying they can hear fine. So I think that Nakaya and Janet, I think those might be issues with your computer. Maybe turn up the volume. Someone says, I can hear him. Please don't talk louder. So I think we're fine. It looks like that might have just been 2 random questions that came in at the same time. So keep going. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. And you can adjust the volume on your computer. So if I'm talking too loud, you can drown me out. And if I'm not talking loud enough, you should be able to boost it using your computer to some extent. Okay, next question. What, if anything, do you need to enter into question 12 of the HUD 52651? That question is sort of the catch-all question. Please use this space to enter any additional information. For most people, there's nothing to enter there. The reason we put that field is, the form asks you for, I believe, up to 9 applicants if you're a joint applicant. We figured some people might have more than 9. And so you need space to enter that information. And that is what question 12 is for. So if you have more than 9 joint applicants, you won't have all the fancy drop downs that you would for the first 9, but we would ask that you put the information in question 12 for the remainder of your joint applicants. That is really the only use of that field as of now. Maybe in future notices, we'll make different use of that field, but that's really what it's there for. Okay, next question. In Grant Solutions, the 52651 shows not started. Yes, apologies. It is outside of the Grant Solutions system. It's Microsoft Forms. So the 52651 does not sync with Grant Solutions. It does not tell Grant Solutions whether it's been submitted or not. The proof that it has been submitted is you're taking a screenshot at the end of the application. Or if you're really unsure of whether you submitted it, you could email and ask us. Unfortunately, you won't get any kind of email confirmation or anything. So it's really just, you going into that form. At the end of it, you'll get a confirmation screen, and knowing that you've seen that screen or you've taken a screenshot of it, that's your verification that the 52651 has been completed. There's another question to confirm. Do initial MTW agencies have to submit the annual participant counts in an ad hoc report? No, we already asked all of the initial moving to work agencies for that prior to the notice. So I believe we actually received that number from everybody. If for whatever reason you think that maybe wasn't reported correctly, or you have a question about that, you can reach out to us, fss@hud.gov. But as far as I know, we are not awaiting any more of those. We received them from everybody who was an initial moving to work agency.
Jason, one caveat is that we've asked for the numbers for 23 and 22 when we sent out that to initial 39 MTW agencies this summer. So if you are an initial MTW agency that wants to revise what is in the funding table for 21, then you would use the self-certification
And
ad hoc form.
all of those numbers were taken from your previous application that, previously we had asked you in your applications to submit an ad hoc report. So that's where the 21 numbers came from. They came from your ad hoc report that was submitted with your last application. So there really shouldn't be any circumstances where you would need to change the 21 number, but if that does come up, certainly let us know. We can discuss it. The other thing is, if you are in initial MTW agency who is at risk of losing a position or your program, we would have sent you the self-certification form in that instance. So, that might be one reason why you would be receiving that, even if you had already submitted the earlier form. Next question, if awards are planned to be announced by the end of December, is there an estimate for the issuance of NOAs and contracting of funds? Great question. So in the future, we hope to start this process much earlier. Now that we've streamlined the notice, one of our goals is to actually start this process at the beginning of July each year. And there's even conceivably a world in which we're able to make the funding announcements by the end of the fiscal year, which is September. Now, can't promise that'll be the case, but in that world, we would then have plenty of time in October, November, and December to do all of the notice of awards or NOAs and to contract the fund and locks. And it is certainly our goal that we can do that so you have all the money before the start of the year. This year, we recognize that may be challenging. So, of course, we will move as quickly as possible to do the NOAs and contract the funds and locks. Oftentimes, the biggest holdup in that process is that you do not have your AOR active in Grant Solutions in order to do that. The good news is because you need to have that already set up to apply, it should actually make that process a lot easier. So in the past, you applied through grants.gov, which didn't require an AOR in Grant Solutions. And so by the time we got to the NOA and contracting stage, then we were dealing with all these issues of, oh, well, I don't have my AOR account set up. Because we're dealing with all those issues now during the application stage, our hope would be that very, very few people will have an issue when we actually get to doing NOAs and contracting the awards. So the hope is that that process can actually proceed much quicker. I can't guarantee that part will happen by the end of the year, but we certainly have a goal to make the announcement by the end of the year. And if possible, of course, to do the NOAs and to contract by then as well, but it just may not be feasible this year. Certainly in the future, that would be our expectation and hope that we would be able to do that. That's one of the reasons we've moved to this process, hopefully to streamline and make it more efficient so we can get this done a lot quicker. The renewal amount is 4% over what we received last year. One notice says 4%, the other says 3%. Yes. So the standing notice, the general notice, is sort of the controlling document in perpetuity, except if the annual notice says otherwise. So the annual notice, you can think of it as sort of superseding if there's any discrepancy between the two. And the reason for that is we wanted to have a baseline expectation that no matter what, we expect that there will be a certain amount of inflation. And so we'll always, give you the option of that 3%, even if we don't publish a higher figure in the annual notice. However, this year we know there was still higher than normal inflation. So that's why we use the Bureau of Labor Statistics to come up with that 4% figure for the annual cost adjustment. But again, neither of those figures should actually matter. You shouldn't just be asking for what we tell you is your old award plus 4%. You should be asking for what it is that you need. So if your increase for your positions is 5%, ask for that. If it's 2%, ask for that. This just gives us the baseline that we use to determine whether your request is reasonable. That's what that number is there for. It's not there for you to copy verbatim into your SF424, and it's not there because it's the only number that we will accept. We will consider any request, and if we need an explanation, we'll let you know, and if we're unable to fund you for your request, we'll let you know. Question about the statement of interest. Yes. So statement of interest is for new grantees. So we are soliciting them, but we're not actually going to be planning to issue any new awards this cycle. But as opposed to in the past where you would have to apply each year as a new applicant, we are now moving to a process where essentially there's a slate of new applicants, and we will be able to pull from that slate in the future if and when we're ever able to make additional new grant awards. each year we plan to confirm whether you want to stay on that slate. So there's no particular rush to do that now, but you're more than welcome to. We are not going to prioritize evaluating those statements of interest until after this competition for the renewal awards, the funding period for the priority by November 1st. And after that point, we'll start to look at the statements of interest. And if your statement of interest is sufficient, we will then give you an opportunity to apply under the renewal application. It doesn't mean you'll be funded as a renewal. It just means we will collect your information that way. So your application will stay on file. So the question here even more specifically says the properties are all separately owned and maintained by limited partnerships. So what I would say is if you have a specific question, if you're a multifamily grantee, and I don't know if Libby is on the line, but you can, of course, email fss@hud.gov, and we would be sure to copy in the multifamily team, or you can also send it to the multifamily mailbox for FSS. I don't want to speak too much about, sort of the details because that's sort of, outside of our knowledge base on the public housing and voucher side. But I would say in general, we would ask that you submit a joint application if that's your intention with all of the properties that intend to be included.
Hey, Jason.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you might want to switch to the
Yes, FAQs.
running through the FAQs.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Let me just, before I do that, just hit a couple quick points here because these aren't necessarily addressed there, although they are. But one is just around, are we doing offsets this year? And we will be doing offsets starting next year. So for the 25 award. And the question was if we had 5,000 in unexpended funds for 23, we will actually be doing recaptures for the 23 awards. That's the last year that we will be doing recaptures. And then in the future, we will be doing offsets. So it will be based on the 2-year prior award, and we'll have to wait, of course, until we have 2 years of awards under this new notice before we can start doing that. So it'll really effectively be the 26th year, in a sense. That'll be the first year for that. How many participants are required when requesting new funds? It's always 50 for a new position, 50 above. So you always need 50 additional participants for each additional position
That's
above
for
the first
that's for an
full-time position.
expansion position, not
Yes,
for a new program. So just want to be clear about what they're asking.
yes. And if
Yeah,
you're,
new programs are 25, expansion positions are 50.
Okay, so let me switch over to the FAQ, but I see a lot of great questions coming in, so keep them coming. This is the sort of the FAQ that will be posted on our website, hopefully, as Anisi said, sometime later. Oh, I think, Eileen, maybe you have to stop sharing before I can, yep, thank you. So hopefully this will be up soon, but in the meantime, you're getting a sneak peek here. Just as in previous FAQs, we have this broken out by section. There's a general section, one on positions, funding, applications, and grant solutions. We'll continue, as I said, to build this out, including with some of the questions you all are submitting today. This first general section goes over a lot of the things that we've talked about in the previous question sessions, which is basically, what is the change from a NOFO to a notice? What about grants.gov and grant solutions? We talk a little bit about the deadline and what about new applicants. So that's probably all stuff that you all are pretty okay with at this point. This second section about positions is maybe a little bit more relevant right now. This is talking about essentially what an expansion position is, how many you're eligible for, how do you ask for them, for more or for less. And then essentially, what if you need to submit a self-certification form? So we go through the scenarios here in question 2.5, question 2.6, as to when you would need to submit a self-certification form. And the same here for question 2.7. So just be on the lookout for, for that link. We would have sent those already last week. And if you haven't received it and you're in one of these 3 buckets, which again is if you are a multifamily PBRA, if you are at risk of losing a position or your whole program, or if you are an MTW expansion agency. So if you didn't receive that link and you're in one of those three buckets, do let us know. There is a question here about joint applicants, and this was a very common question. So we are, just as we do when there's a consolidation, we are going to ensure that with joint applicants, if you combine your application with another grant, that you do not lose any positions for this next year. So let's say, for example, you have two grants that each serve 25 people. That would qualify each grant separately for one coordinator full-time. Combining them together, ordinarily 50 participants still only qualifies you for one coordinator full-time. However, in the first year of that joint application, we will allow you to renew two coordinators because that's what you had before individually, but we will expect that you will then be able to increase your number of participants to 75 or more in order to maintain that second coordinator. So if you're thinking about applying as a joint applicant and you're in that boat where maybe you're on closer to the 25 side than the 75 side, do consider the long-term implications and the feasibility of whether you think you might be able to get up to 75 participants to maintain that position long-term. There's a question here about joint applicants who are not included on the funding table. Separately, we're publishing a list of every PHA that we know of that has FSS participants through PIC data. So you can use that table to help determine how many positions you will be eligible for in total with any of your joint applicants who are not existing grantees. So on that side, please take a look there. We don't have that count for the multifamily side, so that won't necessarily help you if you're adding unfunded joint applicants on the multifamily side. We give all of the currently funded multifamily programs credit for a minimum of 50 participants or whatever is submitted on the self-certification form. However, if it's an unfunded program, the same does not apply. So we would need to send a self-certification form to any of your joint applicants that we don't already have account for if you're intending to apply for more positions on the basis of having multifamily joint applicants. So that section speaks to positions, and it's probably one of the more confusing sections because we've never done expansion positions. This is the first time we're doing that. And so, as we continue to get questions there, we'll try to clarify, maybe add some examples, but please do look there before you email us or put questions in the chat because, that is really the first line of defense. And we created these responses based on, the majority of the questions that we've received so far. Another area that people often ask a lot about is funding. So they want to know how much can they ask for. Some of the questions that we've received in the chat about 4%, what does that mean? You'll notice here the answers is almost always the same. Ask for what you need. You don't need to ask for less, and please don't ask for more. Ask for what you need. We can tell you if that's an amount that requires a justification. We can tell you if we're unable to consider that request or fund that request, but we can't tell you any of those things if you don't ask for what you need. So please spend your time and energy figuring out what it is that you want to be able to pay each one of your positions, including salary, fringe. Fringe includes training and associated travel costs for that training and membership in professional organizations that are relevant. So consider all of that when making your request for all of the positions. Really, all of this is basically saying the same thing. This last question, 3.5, speaks to what we just discussed, which is that we're not doing the optimization formula or offsets this year. We do intend to use the optimization formula next year and funding offsets beginning the year after that. So we hope that the last time we will have to do recaptures is for your previous FY23 grants, and then after that we'll be hopefully out of the recapture game. The next section, section 4, really deals with the application itself. So it talks a little bit about the different forms. We got a lot of questions about the HUD 2880, which is a required form in addition to the SF 424. Then what about the SF LLL? which is an optional form if applicable, and then the HUD 52651, which is also optional if applicable. I talk a little bit about how we're not doing multi-year funding the same way as we did last year. We're actually doing it slightly differently in the sense that you'll have one grant that we intend to extend in perpetuity. And each year we will request the amount that you would like to add to your existing grant. So a little bit different than we did the 2-year grants last time. This again goes over the 3 scenarios where we would require or request a HUD 52651. If you have joint applicants, even if you've applied with them before, we don't just assume you're applying with them again. So you do need to submit that each time. If you are a multifamily PBRA owner, and also if you're requesting expansion positions. If more than one of those things applies, that's fine. You only need to submit one. The form itself asks and covers all 3 of those scenarios. So just submit one form if any of those apply. There was a question here just as earlier talking about if the form isn't completed in Grant Solutions. So again, I know you can't see this yet, but once it's posted online, please do take a look at this. I think it will answer a lot of the questions even that we're probably getting in the Q&A today. There's a question about, what to do if you make a mistake. On the 52651, great news there is you can just resubmit it. If you still have the link, you can just submit a new one. If not, you can email us and we'll send you a link to submit a new one. If there's anything in Grant Solutions that you need to resubmit, that is the instance where we would have to sort of release the application back to you. So you would have to contact us and then we would be able to return it to you so you could make edits. So that's if you would need to modify the SF424, the HUD 2880, the SLLL, any of those forms, you would have to let us know and we would roll the application back to you so you could do that. And finally, this last section talks about Grant Solutions. The flow chart that we went over before and is also currently on the funding webpage does speak a little bit to this, but this is just more detail. This talks about the fact that we said initially that you would be getting an email, which unfortunately most folks did not receive. So we have a different method now that you can use to identify your grant application. That is by logging into Grant Solutions with an account that is associated with the UEI for a valid renewal, and then searching for the FSS renewal application and starting the application that way. And then we talk about really like who can apply and what the difference is between the different roles, such as AORs and grant support staff and PIPDs. They're essentially a hierarchy, and you can think of the AORs having the most access. They can actually accept an award. There's the PIPD, which can submit an award, and then there's grant support staff, which could also be for a grant writer, and they can simply edit and view but not submit the application. So we talk about those scenarios, and whether or not a grant writer can be your AOR or PIPD, and they should not be. Any grant writer who has multiple clients or applications would have to have multiple accounts for each one of those because they would need to be associated with the organization for which they are helping to fill out the application. So that's the FAQ. It's 8 pages, short and sweet. It's actually almost as long as the notice itself. So we will continue to add to it as questions come in, but let me go ahead now and I'll leave this up in case we want to reference it, but I'll go back just to the Q&A and see if we can go, if there's any questions that
Let me
Yep.
let me jump in with a couple that I've seen. A couple people have asked, when I submit a self-certification, how will I know if that has been approved or denied? So we are not reviewing those self-certifications before you submit your application. So if you submitted a self-certification, at this point, assume that we believe you, and that the numbers that you sent in are the numbers that we're going to use, and then ask for however many positions you believe you're eligible for, based on that self-certification in a full application. And then we will look at all of that together. So the self-certification isn't like a pre-submission. It will be looked at with the rest of your application. So don't wait for us to respond to your self-certification or to your 52651. Just assume that that's kind of all together, the package that's going to come in, and we will let you know if there's something missing. And then questions about accessing grant solutions. There is a section in the FAQ on that, but in general, the first thing you're going to want to do is don't email us first. Talk to help@grantsolutions.gov first. They are going to be able to help you figure out who your AOR is. If you need to change, send in a user access form, sort of all of those different things. After you've talked to them and you're still hitting a wall, then you can email us and say, hey, I'm really having trouble. I'm getting nowhere. So a couple days ago, we figured out that somehow somebody's UEI was entered improperly on the funding table, so that when we sent the list of UEIs to Grant Solutions and said, here are all the eligible applicants, their correct UEI wasn't on that list. So that's something that we did need to get involved with, and either earlier today or later today, that corrected UEI is going to go to Grant Solutions, and then that agency will be able to see the directed announcement on the for the renewal. So, but talk to help@grantsolutions.gov first. We can't change your AOR. You don't have to change your AOR on your existing grants in order to have a different person submit your new application. So yeah, so work with Grant Solutions first before you send us a message at fss@hud.gov. Jason, there's a couple questions about what does a priority deadline of November 1st mean, and can I still submit after that deadline, and what will be the implications?
Great question, and it is in the FAQ, so we'll go straight to there. So this is in the first section, question 1.3. So here's the two deadlines. There's the priority deadline and the final deadline. The priority deadline is to ensure that you are considered for expansion positions and to receive your funding as soon as possible. That is ideally by the end of the year. We cannot guarantee that, of course, by the final deadline, since the final deadline is halfway through next year. And we certainly cannot guarantee that you'll be considered for expansion positions at that time if we no longer have funding available to fund expansion positions. So ideally, pretty much everybody, I hope, will be able to apply by the November 1st deadline. You know, we have some leeway there, but not much. So, you know, we may be doing some follow-up with you all past that date, and we will try our best to include as many folks as we can. But if you apply after November 1st, we simply cannot guarantee that you will be included. At some point, we run the numbers, we start putting the funding announcement together, and then it's too late to include people. So if you want to ensure that you're included for consideration for expansion positions and to be announced by the end of the year, please do apply by Friday, November 1st. That's over 2 weeks away. There's still time. So hopefully it's not that long of an application. And even if you're having access issues, you should be able to resolve those by then. Hopefully, we have received anywhere from a quarter to a third of renewal applications in at this point. So the majority we're still waiting on, but I'm hoping as we get closer to the deadline that a lot more of those will be coming in. And we will also try to do some outreach to folks. But you know, ultimately the onus is on you to make sure that, you know, you're staying apprised of all this and that someone from your organization is able to apply. We have this final deadline really is just a fail-safe, so that as opposed to in the past where if you missed the deadline, you just couldn't get funded for the year. Now, although we won't be able to fund you maybe for the expansion positions or get your announcement out by the start of the year, we can still have a mechanism for funding you, even, you know, so that you can back bill to the start of the year, but you just may not be able to get those expansion positions, and you may not get access to that funding for, you know, a while into the next year.
Great.
Mhm.
Can somebody says, do we submit a 52651 if we're applying for an expansion, and also submit a self-certification form if we want to explain why we were requesting another position? And the answer to that is no. If the funding table says that you are eligible for an expansion, and an expansion position or 2 or 3 or however many, and you want an expansion position, and you want the number of, well, right, if you want any number of expansion positions that you're eligible for, then you submit a 52651. You would only need a self-certification form if the funding table says you're not eligible, or the funding table says you're eligible for fewer than you think you should be eligible for, and you want to say, hey, those participant count numbers that you're using to determine my eligibility are incorrect, and I want to explain why that is. So,
And the only two scenarios in which we would accept that is if you are an MTW expansion or if you are a multifamily, right? So if you are a PHA and you think that your pick count is wrong, we will give you the chance to explain that so that you do not lose positions or lose your program. But we are not able to accept that for the purpose of expansion from non-MTW expansion PHAs. And we would encourage you, we may be able to offer expansion positions in the future, but we don't know. But regardless, to ensure if you are a PHA that your numbers in pick are correct. We know that at some point in the future, maybe next year, there'll be a transition to HIP, and we hope that'll make the process of keeping your records up to date much easier. But regardless, that is always something that we would encourage you to do, is to take a look at the numbers that we post in the funding table and compare it to what your records say. And if there's a discrepancy, work with your pick coach or with your software vendor to see what the issue is there. There's a question, if you type the dollar amount under a federal and it shows an error, please enter numbers. It could be because you're putting a dollar sign or a comma, or maybe an O instead of a 0. That's something I've frequently seen. So I can't say exactly why that's happening, but if you continue to have some issue and there's maybe something else going on, you can always contact Grant Solutions to look into that further. There could be a number of other reasons that I can't even think of. Maybe, you have a different type of keyboard or something that, you're entering in some kind of foreign character that's not being recognized as a number. Who knows? But we don't really handle the tech support from that, and that's Grant Solutions. There's a
I will
question.
also say that we've received over 200 applications now, and nobody else has come up with that question. So I don't think that there's an issue with the form. So you probably should be looking at a local question, a local solution.
Great. What if the holdup is getting access to Grant Solutions? We're giving you this long period to get access, to get all this resolved. If you don't have access resolved, we can only accept the application through Grant Solutions. So we would just encourage you to work on that as quickly as possible. You can certainly let us know and say, hey, I'm still waiting to get access, and we can help to try to expedite that potentially. And again, we'll try to be flexible and accept the application if and when you're able to submit it, even if it's slightly past the deadline. We just can't guarantee it. So, there's still more than 2 weeks left. My understanding is, we're copied on a lot of these emails from Grant Solutions, and these issues can get resolved fairly quickly if it's just a Grant Solutions issue. If it's a SAM.gov issue where you don't have a UEI, then that would take longer. However, every single renewal has an active UEI. That's how we added you to the system so that you're even eligible to apply. So in very few cases, less than probably 10% of cases, potentially could your UEI have expired between the time that we added you to the application and now. And if that's the case, that should be a relatively simple fix to go into SAM.gov and reactivate your UEI. So if there's some specific strange circumstance why this should take you longer than to the end of the month to resolve, let us know and we can see what we can do. But ultimately, we do need to receive the application through Grant Solutions, and we are not aware of any issue that should cause anybody more than the amount of time remaining to be able to do so.
Yeah, getting someone identified or as the AOR or the PIPD or staff support in Grant Solutions usually just takes minutes usually. If you send the user access form to Grant Solutions, and you can find that user access form and the instructions on how to use it on the FSS funding page. If you send that to Grant Solutions, they usually respond within the day. Oh, also somebody said that the problem that they figured out the problem with the 424 form was that they were using a comma. So don't put commas in your numbers.
Um, there's a couple good questions here about how do you change access and grant solutions. That's actually in the FAQ. So we talk about this. That is exactly what Anisi just said, the user access request form. And so that is what you would do to change your access in grant solutions. There's a question of self-certification. Is there anything that it should include? Yes, it is a form. It asks you one question for your participant count. So that's what you need to include. So should be fairly straightforward. There's a question about you're still uncertain if you need to submit a 52651. And the answer we gave live is maybe not helping you. So please send us an email to fss@hud.gov with the specifics of your situation, and we can certainly talk about it there. But I would say in general, if the only circumstance where you would be submitting a self-certification and requesting expansion positions are if you are an MTW expansion agency or if you are a multifamily property. And those are the only really two scenarios.
There's several questions about the 2880. I have answered those in the answered questions with basically cutting and pasting the Q&A. But the 2880 is the same form that's filled out every year. Basically, what you need to know on that one is that the answer to question 1 in part 1 for everyone is yes. That question says basically, is this money for a specific project? The answer is yes. Second question is very convolutedly asked, but basically what it's asking is, are you asking for more than $200,000? If no, the answer is no. Stop there, sign it, send it in. If yes, the answer is yes. Go on to the next section. I don't know any FSS program that has ever had to disclose that the money was actually going to a different concerned party. So probably the answer there is NA. If for some reason you have information that you need to put in there, put in that information, sign it and send it in. But just remember, question number 1 is yes for everyone. Question number 2 is over 200,000 or under 200,000. And that's all in FAQ as well.
Great. There's a question about the funding table. So that is up on our funding webpage for the FSS notices for FY24. I know Eileen put a link to that in the chat. And just a note there, we continually update that table. Sometimes people write in, there's an error, some mistake in the table, whatever it may be. So we do update that table frequently. And, for the most part, that only affects less than 2% of the folks in that table. So it probably wouldn't affect you, but if you've reached out to us with an issue, and you'll know that's why your information has been updated, and otherwise it's probably the same from last time. Is multifamily the same as a housing authority serving HCV and PH? No. A multifamily owner is PBRA, so that's different than housing choice vouchers or public housing.
There's a couple questions about when people need to submit a funding modification request, like what kind of specific criteria or evidence would be considered adequate to justify a request for extra funding. And so just to be really, really clear, you would only need a funding modification if you are requesting more than the BLS data plus 40% plus 10%. So just be sure you need one. But if you do need one, basically what we generally see are fringe benefits. So our health insurance costs have gone up a whole lot recently, and so we need more. Our FPHA is part of the city and it's unionized, and so the FSS positions are categorized at this level of sort of the pay scale. We don't have control over that, so we need more money. Sometimes it might be, hey, we have actually been asking for a lot less than we needed for the past several years, and we just realized that we had an opportunity to ask for more. So, you know, here's what we actually need, and we've been in a shortfall for several years. Jason, what other kind of things have we looked at that have been reasons to ask for more? Oh, we haven't been able to attract or retain a qualified candidate at the level that we have been funding them before. We need to ask for more in order to get a qualified candidate who will, you know, to attract and retain them.
I mean, ultimately, what I would say is there's an infinite number of reasons why you're requesting what you need to request. Just explain it. If you already are paying that amount and you have backup to show this is what we're paying, then just produce that. If you intend to, then, you know, give us the best evidence you have of why that's reasonable. This is what we currently pay. This is what we would like to be paying. You know, we will let you know, we'll give you a chance to explain, and, you know, hopefully we can get to a point where we will either let you know we can't accept this and that's just what it is, or you can revise it and we can get to a place where, you know, we have what we need.
But also, so send it in with your explanation and ask for the amount of money that you think you need. We can always give you less after talking to you or reviewing your documentation or whatever, but we can't give you more. And it's going to be more of a hassle if we have to like reject your entire application and ask you to resubmit your entire application with a lower number on your 424. Just don't do that. Ask for the whole amount that you think you need. And then, you know, if we need to give you less, we'll give you less.
There's a good question here is, do you need to submit a 52651 if you are applying for an expansion position? Yes. If you are applying to not lose a position, no, unless you are a joint applicant or a multifamily, which multifamily shouldn't be losing positions. So really just joint applicant. There is a question about cooperative agreements and the 52651 for joint applicants. So you can think about the 52651 as memorializing the joint application, but the cooperative agreement, so the 52651 is what lets us know that you have a joint application. The cooperative agreement is really between you all as joint applicants, memorializing between yourselves that arrangement. So, you know, we don't ask you for copies of the cooperative agreement, but we do ask you to report on the 52651 that you are a joint applicant, and it's up to you all to have, you know, a cooperative agreement amongst yourselves in order to do so. There's a question about salary differences among coordinators. Yes, so we give you one sort of number for what we think is reasonable based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you want to pay, you know, different positions, different amounts, that's certainly something that happens. If you need to submit a modification request, you can let us know that's what the breakdown is, right? Like one person's getting this, one person's getting this. If you don't need to submit a modification request, then you really don't need to let us know, right? We don't really care about the breakdown per position as long as it's a reasonable request. And so it's only really in the case where you need a funding modification request that we would ask for the breakdown between different positions. So I think that's a lot of the questions. What if you're
There's a FAQ on this too, but the SF424 doesn't allow us to show continuation. Do we just leave new? Yes. For the purposes of this funding, all of the applications are, you're asking for new money that you've never gotten before. So these are all new, and just a general rule of thumb, if the 424 is pre-populated or won't let you put information somewhere, leave it alone.
Yep. So there's a question about, we have 17 coordinators and we're eligible for 26 positions. Can we consolidate the supervisory roles into 1 or 2 positions? We actually spoke about this at the office hours this week, and as long as you are only doing activities that are eligible activities, that's fine, right? And that is the case that we were describing on the call, right? If you have a large number of coordinators, rather than have everybody spend a sliver of their time on those activities, you can sort of specialize certain positions as long as all of the activities are eligible activities. If 10 or 20% of their time is doing ineligible activities, then you can only pay for 80 or 90% of their salary from this grant.
Does the amount listed on the funding table include training? So not specifically. It is a general sort of hypothetical amount for fringe. So we haven't included, any kind of training in that fictitious fringe amount. So add in your fringe or add in your training when you're calculating your fringe and ask for what you need.
Yeah, one way to think about this is don't confuse 40% with fringe. Don't confuse 10% with training. We use those numbers to come up with a number for what we think is a reasonable amount for you to request. But for you, your fringe might be 50%. It might be 30%. For you, training might be $300 or $3,000. Whatever it is that you want to request, request it. And if we can't see from our numbers that that's a reasonable request, we will come back to you for justification. But don't just, base what you pay your folks on the number we give you. Pay and compensate based on what you think that they should receive, and then ask us for what it is that you need to do so. The 40% plus 10%, there's another question there. And yes, so we run both calculations before we require sort of an explanation, right? So if it's the 10% is just sort of a buffer because anything within 10% of the BLS plus 40, we assume it's reasonable. Anything within 10% above your renewal amount, which is 4% over your last amount, we think is reasonable. So it's only if the requests are above that we would require that explanation.
So also there's a question here. So the total funding amount listed would not be correct as we always request trading funds. So again, as Jason was saying, there is no correct, right? So this is, we are giving you basic calculations here. What if you included training in what you requested and got last year, that will be reflected on the funding table. But if you didn't, then you can include it this year and ask for what you need. Also, we will be, unlike perhaps in the past, where there have been really, really strict and harsh rules around, well, if you didn't submit it correctly the first time, that's it, you're out. Because this is not a NOFO and it's a funding formula now, we have a lot of flexibility with how we communicate with you to get your information so that we can do our analysis. So we will be going back to you if you submit something and something is missing or we need more information. We will be going back to you to get that information. Same as like our goal is that every single entity that is eligible for a renewal, we want to actually have an application from them or hear an affirmative, we are not applying for funding this year. Our goal is to be tenacious and to hear from every single person. So that's one of the reasons we ask you to apply as soon as possible, because literally starting next week, we're going to start sending the hunting dogs out for you if we haven't heard from you yet. Even though the application is due November 1st, we really want to make sure that everybody gets one in.
And I'll also say, I mean, a lot of these questions are answered in the FAQs. I know they're not posted yet, so please do take a look at the FAQs. Some of this stuff is just really basic about FSS in general, actually has nothing to do with the notice. So there's a question, if someone is only working 40% toward eligible activities, is that okay? It is okay to request 40% of their salary, if that's okay. You cannot pay 100% of someone's salary if they're only spending 40% of their time on FSS. In fact, you can only spend 40% of the award if that's the case. So really do look at This hasn't changed based on the notice, and a lot of the parameters of the program haven't really changed. So, you know, those kind of questions I think are sort of foundational, and I would just encourage you to sort of do like the mandatory training and look at some of the documents we have on the FSS website in general, just to become familiar with even what's in your grant agreement. If we don't have an FSS program, can we apply for the grant this year? You absolutely can apply. We don't believe we'll be able to fund you, but we will keep your application on file for if and when we are able to fund new applications.
Um, do you have to provide any documentation of current staff cost? Only if you're submitting a funding modification request. But really, like, we don't need like pay stubs or whatever. We just need an explanation.
So I know we only have a quick minute here, a couple quick questions. These are good ones. One is, what if your region doesn't show on BLS? The notice actually speaks to that. If you don't have a BLS for your particular area, we then look at the statewide data. If there's no statewide data for your state, we look at the national data. So that's outlined in the notice. And then there's a question about if you're awarded an expansion position, it will take some time to onboard them. Will this hurt us in the next year's optimization or offset? Well, first of all, an offset never hurts you. So just be aware of that. An offset is no different than a recapture, except that it saves time and it saves energy, but it doesn't reduce the amount of money at your disposal. So you're never harmed by an offset, because an offset is simply the money we would have taken from you anyway and given back to you in a new award. And now we're just avoiding that back and forth, and we're subtracting it out of your new award. So you are absolutely not harmed with an offset. With an optimization, we look at 3 years and we give you the highest of those 3 years. So it will not hurt you if you take a long time to optimize, to onboard your new hire, unless it takes you more than 3 years to do so. And at that point, we think it's pretty reasonable that we should start considering that. So it's only the case that if you have 3 consistent years of low utilization, that you would really have a reduction in your award due to optimization. And even then, we have a place in the notice where we would allow you to explain why that is the case, to not have that happen. But, that shouldn't happen just based on 1 year of a reduced expenditure. Okay, I know we are pretty much here at time. I just want to remind folks that we do have 2 more of these question sessions coming up. We have one next Thursday, but it's an hour earlier than normal. That is at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And then we have our final one the following Tuesday, the 29th, and that's at the normal 2 p.m. Eastern time. We hope this has been helpful. We'll continue to update the FAQ, to post more information on the funding webpage. Because we don't intend to change this process very much from year to year, hopefully this is sort of the hump year where everyone sort of has to get just with the new process, and then it'll be much smoother in future years. So this hopefully is not too much to take on board. We have the flow chart, which should help you. We have the FAQs, which should help you. We have the instructions, which should help you. And then, as always, we're available on these question sessions and at fss@hud.gov. So I hope through all these different avenues, you're able to get whatever information it is you need to successfully complete your application. Our goal is that 100% of those who want to be renewed will be renewed. Please do let us know if you're having any issues, but please do consult those resources first. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your work to complete this part of the process, so we can move on to the real business of running your programs. And ultimately, that's what you're here for and what we're here for. So thank you, and stay safe, and we'll hope to see you next week. And just as a reminder, the FAQs are going to be posted soon. We've already submitted them to be posted. So your best guess is ours, but any minute now, hopefully, but hopefully by tomorrow, if not today.